everyone. I'm making a presentation related to the question that's before us for this symposium, addressing the question of whether the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual should add a category for high risk of schizophrenia. I'm approaching it as a public health person and a mental health services researcher thinking about issues in the financing of mental health services. The work comes from a paper that I took the lead on for the World Health Organization at a conference that was sponsored by WHO and the American Psychiatric Institute for Research and Education. The slide that's in front of you will show you the co-authors from this project. This was a distinguished group of investigators from around the world who thought about these questions. The broader issue is about the economic consequences of revising the diagnostic nomenclature for mental disorders. And I'll take you through that discussion and relate it to the main question about the consequences, really, of having a new condition that identifies people who might be at high risk of developing schizophrenia. The most important critical issue in consideration of the relationship of changes in the diagnostic nomenclature and financing policy is based on the idea that diagnoses are a way of determining the need for services. And each time we identify new conditions and infer a need for service, it raises the question of what types of services are needed. When people are already impaired or have a disability, the tendency is to focus on treatment services, maybe even inpatient services or rehabilitation. It also, of course, triggers eligibility for other benefits like disability compensation, housing, and the like. When one develops a new service category that's related to risk of a condition, excuse me, there's the opportunity to broaden the base of individuals who might be included, and it suggests an opportunity for prevention, and that's another whole set of services. That's certainly what's operative here in the consideration of a category at high risk for a condition like schizophrenia. There are a whole host of things that relate to this particular issue. One of them is that we do historically characterize cost of illnesses, and when we add an illness, it changes our estimates, and these are important for policy development and in politics for representing, again, the need for resources for a condition. The cost of illness studies focus on economic burden, both direct and indirect costs, and as I say, this would change as the nomenclature changes. I wanted to see whether I skipped a slide here. Yeah, this really looks at the broadest issue of the relationship of diagnosis to economic policy, and I think my comments have already addressed this issue. When we have a very broad definition of a need for service, then we include a great many more potential services and interventions than if we narrow the definition, and an at-risk category in the DSM-5 would broaden the definition. Concomitant with that are considerations of things like what is the proper division of labor, who will deliver the services. That's determined largely by the shape of the care system. In some instances, it will expand the role for primary care practitioners in identifying conditions or focus entirely on specialized care once a condition has emerged. That typically falls to the specialty care sector, particularly if the problem has a complex treatment intervention. Along the way, the issues of eligibility for these services are often linked to the diagnosis, and it raises a whole host of policy questions about rights to certain privileges in the society, vote, whether one has access to housing that's subsidized, access to income support, and we're very concerned about how fair those policies might be. Eligibility for insurance or for services is going to be critical here. I think that's probably the most pressing issue associated with adding a category for high-risk schizophrenia. Over the years, we've focused on eligibility for people who already have conditions that manifest distress and dysfunction. To add a category for someone who's at risk of falling into that category is going to change our thinking about eligibility for insurance or for services that are provided for people who don't have insurance. To be very specific about it, if the priority for services or the eligibility criteria is linked to established conditions and to high levels of dysfunction and disability, as is currently true in the public mental health system, then a condition for people who are first showing the manifestations of an illness, no matter how serious it might be downstream, it raises the question of whether they'll be eligible for services. People with first episode schizophrenia, or moving even further back, people who have a prodromal condition, or even who seem to be at risk of a condition, do not typically fall into the priority populations for services provided in the public mental health system. And the way things are organized now are unlikely to be eligible for insurance coverage. What this will require is changing our thinking about what is medically necessary, and hopefully these medical necessity criteria will be linked to effective treatments, and that what in fact will be, people will become eligible by virtue of identification in this new category because there are effective interventions that one wants to allocate resources for. And that's really the heart of the issue as I see it in terms of adding a new condition such as high risk for schizophrenia. A fine point, and my last point in this presentation, is to say that when payments are decided, let's say we make people eligible for services by virtue of having this condition, high risk for schizophrenia, we have to determine how much payment will be made for it. And so it may be that payment rates will be adjusted based on diagnosis, and adding new conditions means making changes in case mix adjustments for payment systems. That's another consequence of adding a disorder. This final slide shows you the kinds of dimensions that are considered in the development of such a case mix adjustment. That concludes my presentation.